Good afternoon. My name is Vincent Garnier. I'm the Director General of the FTTH Council. We're hosting this event, and it's my great pleasure to moderate this session. Before we kick off, I just want to give you very few information about our organization. Michele, maybe we can move to the next slide. Yes, the FTTH Council is a pan-European organization. We have a mission to promote a full fiber network everywhere in Europe. Our members range from vendors, operators to investors, covering the full value chain of FTTH in Europe. And actually, Nokia, the sponsor of today's session, is a very active member of our organization. So this webinar is part of a series of webinars we are conducting on a recurring basis. And Michele, if you can help me move to the next slide. Yes. And we've had several sessions in the past month. The next one, you will be, of course, invited to join. Will take place on the 2nd of December, and we'll talk about the exploration of technology and business benefit of disaggregation in the PON access network. That webinar will be sponsored by Comscope. A few housekeeping items for this webinar. The session is obviously recorded, and you will have access to the replay. That email will be sent to you together with link to the PDF of the deck. So the deck which will be used for this webinar, all the slides used by our presenter today will be shared with you after the event. You can use the question box on the platform to ask any question. We have set some time towards the end of the session to address this question. So do not hesitate to interact with us. We'll try and take as many questions as possible after the presentation. Now, you all know that fiber rollout is accelerating in Europe. Today, and this is something we are measuring at the FTTH Council, more than 50% households have access to fiber in Europe. Some countries are on track to complete full coverage soon, while others, like, for example, Germany, the UK, Italy, or Belgium, start with a much lower level, but have now extremely ambitious plan to catch up and develop full fiber network at record speed. At the Council, we see fiber as an enabler of essential application. And from this perspective, it's very interesting to understand the different needs and to make sure that fixed network make the most out of the potential brought by fiber. Thanks to Nokia, this webinar will explain to you how to make sure that fiber network address the needs for more bandwidth, more capacity, both for private subscribers, but also for enterprise and businesses, which have different needs. We will see that it is time to look beyond GPON and to envisage XGS-PON with 10 or 25 gig bandwidth and speed. We will also look at the consequences of gigabit speed on home connectivity. How can we make sure that in-home Wi-Fi, for instance, does not become a bottleneck? So these are some of the topics that our two speakers will address. And I will now introduce each of them, starting with Anna Pesovic, who leads fixed network fiber marketing in Nokia. Anna has an extensive international telecom experience, having held various positions in sales, pre-sales, and R&D in many European countries. Anna, I see Belgium, Germany, Portugal, Spain, India, and you were very actively involved in several industry organizations, starting with the FTTH Council Europe, where you've been on the board of directors, and also the NG-PON Council at Broadband Forum. Hannah has a master's degree in informatics and computer science from the University of Belgrade, so true international European fiber specialist. And we will be joined after Anna's presentation by Gino Dion. He's located in St. John, New Brunswick in Canada. So I'm sure I pronounced everything properly, Gino, and excuse me for that. But you are remotely connected from Canada, and it's very happy to have you here. You're heading Nokia Fixed Network Innovation Solutions. You come with 20 years or more of telecom industry experience with having extensively worked with many C-level leaders from network operations, service provider, MSO worldwide, and you also have good experience of major web-scale corporations such as Apple and Amazon. And from a pure technology standpoint, you bring your experience in all aspects of IP video service delivery, low latency gaming optimizations, advanced innovation R&D, IoT security, to name a few, but also service insurance and cloud native technology. So with that, I will leave the floor to Hannah, who will start with the first section of this webinar. Hannah, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Vincent, for this nice introduction. It's always a pleasure to be part of the projects of the FTTH Council, because Nokia was one of the founding members of the council, and I myself personally have been involved many years with the council. So I hope you can see my screen. Yes, so thank you. So today we see massive opportunities with fiber. First of all, pandemics has accelerated new digital behavior. We all know that, we still feel that. People are more at home doing more things that require bandwidth, and more members of the family are simultaneously using bandwidth. So we have seen that this has changed the need for the service providers, that the acceleration to next generation PON has actually started, and as I will show later, it will happen sooner than we previously expected. The second big trend we can observe today with fiber is that the operators are increasingly seeing fiber as a unified infrastructure for all their services. So originally in the past, fiber and GPON were mostly for the consumer segment, connecting homes, but now there is an ambition to use fiber also for businesses, and also in smart cities, 5G world, and so on. And especially want to focus on the last one, because the world is going 5G, but we see the 5G is going fixed, and maybe even better to say 5G is going fiber, because the deployments of 5G will be very much linked to availability of fiber. Until recently, there were a lot of discussions in our industry, what will win, fixed or mobile, and every few years there will be new technologies on one or the other side that will encourage people to think one or the other way. But now we are really coming to conclusion that we need both fixed and mobile, because they are a perfect fit, and 5G will only benefit from a lot of fiber, not only to connect more users to complement each other in connectivity, but fiber is needed for efficient transport. So I would also talk a little bit about that. Now, these trends that we see today are also confirmed with what we see from the analysts. If you look at the forecasts in fixed networks revenues, you will see that they are increasing for the past few years. You will see that the growth is really in all regions, and Europe is one of the biggest areas of growth, so that's really good to see. The next generation PON is also accelerating according to the forecast. So it's really a nice time for our industry. A lot of exciting things are happening. But let me tell you a little bit more about the next generation fiber. Why do we see this accelerating? So we have been doing always some forecasting of the bandwidth. We did it a couple of years ago in pre-COVID times. We look at a PON with 32 users on a PON, And then we have also looked now in the COVID times, and obviously this demand has increased. That's obvious because more people are at home and more people are using broadband. But there is another thing. Since the gigabit broadband has become, or is becoming a common marketplace, the operators need to ensure that the users can have gigabit at all times because they are paying for it. So of course, when they want to do a speed test, or they want to download a movie, or use any other type of service that require a higher peak bandwidth, the users will have to see that they have it. So for that reason, operators are leaving the headroom, just like a spare bandwidth, as you wish, on a PON. So although the full capacity of PON is 2.5 gig, in fact a little bit less because of the overhead, the exhaustion of PON is happening at 1.5 gig. And this is where we are now, or that we are heading to. And what we previously believed would be the date for massive migration to XGS-PON is actually happening 3 to 4 years earlier. And XGS-PON has been really the technology of choice to upgrade GPON, although there were other flavors, which happens always in our industry. XGS-PON has been adopted globally as the technology to move from GPON. And if you look at what is the value proposition of XGS-PON, we can really think it's a game-changing technology. First of all, it's competitive. It's also disruptive. It's a very good one to use in markets where there are a lot of cable operators, and operators have been using that as a strategy. But it also enables the new revenues. It is being increasingly used for Industry 4.0, but also for mobile transport. And we are just, seeing it's only just started. We are just going to see more of it in the future. Now, given that XGS-PON migrations has just started, somebody may ask, okay, well, do we really need the next step? And the short question is yes. There are needs for boosting the capacity beyond 10 gigabit. Because fiber is not only about speed, fiber is about monetization, about having more different type of services that will enable more revenues on the existing infrastructure investment. Now, there are also some debates in the industry. What would be the next step? Would it be 25 gigabit, 50 gigabit, or something else? We believe that 25 gigabit is the best step for the evolution for several reasons. First of all, 25 gigabit PON is very cost efficient, and cost efficiency is one of the mandatory requirements for any successful fixed network technology, because we are not like transport technology or core, where you have, where are not so massive in volumes like we are. Fixed networks have to connect every user in every house, in every street. So we are talking about huge volumes, and the only way to be successful in deploying such huge volumes is to be cost efficient. Now, for 25 gigabit PON is using the components that are being deployed today in big volumes for data centers. So they're using the same type of optical technologies, and that helps 25 gigabit PON to be more cost efficient. The other nice attributes of 25 gigabit PON is that, for example, can coexist with GPON and XGS-PON simultaneously. And this is very important because operators don't move from one technology to another in one day. These technologies have to coexist on the same network for many years. And it cannot be that the operator have to skip GPON or skip XGS-PON or do some kind of forklift migration because the three technologies cannot exist on the same fiber at the same time. So that's not a problem of a 25 gigabit PON. The industry organization that is in charge of standardizing 25 gigabit PON technology is called 25GS MSA, multi-source agreement. It's a group of operators, optical vendors, silicon vendors, system vendors, and so on, that are already specifying or just published actually the second version of the standard, so it's going really, really fast. And they have agreed to make the wavelength plan of the 25 gigabit PON in such a way that it doesn't coincide with the wavelengths of GPON or XGS-PON. So all three generations of technologies can be together on the same fiber. But also, you know, what we can say about 25 gigabit PON is that it is probably the last technology that can reuse the current generation of technologies and lasers that have been used today. So it's a kind of a linear evolution. Everything that comes after 25 gigabit PON will be a quantum leap in complexity and in cost, and will require time to mature and be readily usable for massive deployments. So a lot of research has to be done. For example, in 50 gigabit PON, we will need the new DSPs, digital signal processing, because we are running at much higher speeds. So there are a lot of technical difficulties. There is a bigger loss, there is a dispersion, and so on. So all these technical difficulties needs to be solved. Can we solve them? Of course we can. We are engineers, we can do anything, but it will take time to mature these technologies and be ready to deploy them. And in fact, when we have the DSPs for 50 gigabit PON, the step to 100 gig will be very small, because we are crossing that quantum leap in complexity. So the steps from there on will be already a little bit smaller. Now, I have already mentioned the MSA, and maybe it's also a good opportunity to talk about the traction in the market for 25 gigabit PON. So we, as a Nokia, have already brought a solution, the commercial solution to the market that has been tested by different operators. In May this year, we even had the first live network with 25 gigabit PON, that was with Proximus. And we have done many trials in more than 20 trials all over the world. Now, this is a traction that we see with operators. But on the other hand, we see that the ecosystem for 25 gigabit PON is also growing. And this is about the MSA, the standardization organization that has been formed roughly 1 year ago, I think in October last year, and has grown from 10 founding members to more than 40 members that we have today. So this is quite important, because for few things. First, because 25 gig is driven by operators, is driven by the need they see in the network. And the second is important to have this ecosystem ensure the specs, ensure the interoperability, and so on and so on. So that's really good to see. Now let me tell you a little bit more about the use cases for 10 gigabit and 25 gigabit PON. As I said, GPON has been around for 15 years or maybe a little bit more, and has been predominantly used for consumer services. What we see now is that the market for fiber connectivity to enterprises is growing. On the graph here on the left-hand side, you see the forecast for the connectivity of enterprises with different technologies, and the FTTH is growing. Now, to be completely fair, many of them are still point-to-point, but we see that the PON type of connectivity is growing. When we talk to our customers, almost all of them are using PON for small, medium enterprise connectivity. What is now going to happen with XGS-PON and 25 gigabit PON, that also the bigger enterprises can be addressed, and in general, Industry 4.0. We have heard examples from our customers about their business customers, from the agricultural sector, warehouse sector, and many others, who are using the high definition images and send them to the cloud for analysis and real-time decision making and feedback. That this has been used more and more because it helps to automate the enterprise, it helps to reduce the human error, to speed up the process, be more accurate, and overall help increase the productivity of the business. So that's why the businesses are also often willing to pay more for a better connectivity, and communication service providers can leverage on that to increase their monetization on the fiber network. Not to mention the Offices 4.0, who are going to be one of the biggest, if not the biggest, contributor to higher bandwidth consumption. They need a high capacity connectivity both in upstream and downstream. And there is also a third segment, which is a digital campus. So this is about using fiber-based local area networks. Sometimes you will hear talking about the pole or optical LAN, but this is also in growing, and it requires already 10 gigabit and moving towards the 25 gigabit capacity. So these are all benefits for the enterprises, but what are the benefits for the operators? So first of all, we mentioned monetization, faster monetization, but also the fact that they can converge, or they have all these three different type of PONs on the same network, so they can serve the right, or they can offer the right service to the right customer with the right speed. Having one network, converged network for consumers, businesses, and even mobile transport is of course a more efficient, it's cheaper to deploy, operate, and maintain than having a separate dedicated network for each of these segments. And of course, it's always good to remind everybody that it's also greenest way to connect enterprises, and this is something which is very high on the agenda and very high importance for both businesses and communication service providers. Now, I have been mentioning a couple of times 5G, anyhow, 5G transport, so I would like to spend a little bit more words on that. Now, I think every one of us have heard about the importance of fiber in 5G. Why is that? Well, because for 5G to be successful, it needs to have a good or let's say a very good transport network. The bandwidth is increasing on 5G, the latency needs to be lower. So there is a lot of changes from LTE to 5G. Now you have to do many things in your 5G network to have more cells, you know, to do upgrades on the core and so on, but you also need to enable a good transport network that will deal with this higher traffic, lower latency traffic, and so on. There are different ways you can do that transport and carry the traffic from the small cells deeper in the network, but PON is the most cost-efficient way to do it. And you know, let me just say that last year, Omdia has conducted a study, or rather a survey amongst operators who are planning to deploy 5G, asking them what are the biggest challenges of 5G. And they have placed transport as a #2 concern in 5G. So it goes even before core, before cloud. And then the next question was, what is the biggest concern for transport itself? And their answer was cost. Because if you're going to have these new cell sites and densify your 5G network, you need to invest in the cells, but you also need to invest in the transport and connecting those small cells. So operators are looking at cost-efficient technologies to do this transport, and PON is a technology that enables this cost efficiency because it's simply already deployed where the 5G cells are going to be. This is on the left side, you can see a graph from an operator in Europe who has plotted their fiber deployments, their residential users, their business users, and the future mobile cells. And of course, the footprint is matching, and that makes it very compelling case for fiber, because you know, there's no need to invest in a transport network. It's basically already there. So it's really a no-brainer. And then Bell Labs have done a business case comparing total cost of ownership for different transport technologies, including own point-to-point, meaning really digging fiber, putting fiber in the ground to every small cell. And that's obviously the most expensive option, but it's here just for, you know, just to make a relative comparison. And then they have also included other transport mechanism, like for example, point-to-point dark fiber lease, or point-to-point dark fiber lease that will aggregate the multiple microwave transport technologies, and compare that with PON. There are two options for PON. You can either do a capacity lease on a PON, or you can use your own PON, which is the case for converged operators. And of course, that's always the best case if you own the fixed networks and the mobile network, you can make the most synergies. In this case, could be more than 50% cheaper than other transport options. But cost is not the only advantage for PON-based anyhow. There are also advantages for scalability, because you can add more cells as you're densifying your network. You know, it's not a problem to add more cells on a PON network because it has a higher capacity, and also you can evolve that capacity on the same fiber without doing anything on the outside plant. So you can move from 10 to 25, 50 to 100 gig and so on without too much investment. And the third very nice attribute of PON for anyhow is that it's very simple. It has a zero footprint at the cell site, and you know, lower power consumption, so very easy to operate. That helps, of course, to be faster to the market. So not just cheaper, but also faster with 5G services. And then just let me end with something more futuristic, maybe, coherent PON. Now, what we are seeing today is, we are 25 is here, over 10 is here, 25 is here, 50 gig will come end of this decade. After that, 100 gig. So what comes next? But when we look at the way that today PON is working, where we are using the power modulation, so we are looking at the amplitude of the signal. So the high amplitude is 1, the low amplitude is 0, and this is how the information is transmitted in the signal. And we see that it's going to be very difficult to use this same type of technology, the same principles, if we want to go beyond 100 gigabit PON. So there are other technology options that are being exploited, and this is a coherent PON. So it's very interesting because in coherent PON, we are taking more attributes of light. So we are still going to use the power, the higher and the lower waves for zeros and ones. But there will be more dimensions. For example, the phase modulation. That means by moving the wave back and forward in time, we can add extra information to the signal, or by using polarization, we could again add more information. So how does it work in polarization? We would actually send 2 waves instead of 1, but they would be in a different spatial direction. So it's very similar to waving a rope. So you can do it up and down, but you can also do it left and right. So in coherent PON, we are going from going to 3-dimensional signaling instead of 1-dimensional, which we had so far. But of course, this is a little bit of a futuristic. It's still in research. A lot has to be done, but it's one of the approaches that we will certainly hear of more in the future. And then, just let me close by saying what we have seen now is about delivering gigabit speeds to the home. But that's not the end of it, because you need to deliver these new experiences inside the home and make sure that the high capacity pipe that we bring to the homes can be totally exploited inside. And with this, I would like to pass the word to my colleague Gino, who is going to take us through the new experiences inside the home. So Gino, I'll make you a presenter.
Perfect.
And maybe while we are transitioning the slides, sorry, Gino, I just want to thank the people who have already posted a question on the question box, and encourage others to do the same. Any question related to the previous presentation, but also any question which will be triggered by your presentation, Gino, are most welcome, and we will address them towards the end of the session. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you, Vincent. And thank you, Anna, for such an excellent setup. I like the way you ended things. So we now have this amazing bandwidth capacity and amazing latency. So how can we actually monetize this and actually make real good use of it? And why wasn't this done in the past? So that's a very good question, and I think you're going to really like what I'm going to share with you with the crowd today. So one of the first things to look at is, why is it that we weren't really capitalizing on all of this bandwidth capacity? And there are some historical reasons for this. Even though PON and GPON has been around for 15-something years, as Anna said, cost was often an issue. So the focus was really on bandwidth delivery more than anything else, and the ONTs or the ONUs were seen as a big CapEx component. So driving the costs out of that CP device was often part of the equation for the business case. But what if you could flip things around? Now that we have a mature fiber network, now that we have all of this capacity, this amazing latency, what can we do to really help change the game a little bit? So let's take a look at that. why is it in the past that this was really hard to do? Well, there's a couple of reasons. You had things like SOC architecture variations. So different ONTs would have different CPUs, different architectures and operating systems, and that made it really challenging if you wanted to deploy at what I like to call the ultra edge. And you'll start hearing this a lot more in the next couple of years, but the ultra edge is making use of edge computing directly into the home. So SOC architecture variations made this complicated because you may have ONTs and ONUs from a variety of vendors, and it was really hard to integrate applications or third-party services on top of it. The second thing was real-time data telemetry. Being able to get intelligence from those applications or from in the home was also very challenging. Now, there's excellent standards that exist out there from the Broadband Forum and things like that, but it was always tough. If you wanted down to the second data from these applications, you had to funnel that through maybe an ACS and things like that. And that wasn't really easy to do at large scale. That's changed now. There are some proper standards to be able to do that, such as USP and TR-181 data models and things like that. The third one, service creation velocity. That's the third pillar that we, as an industry, we wanted to address. How quickly can I launch a new service or an application? Well, in the past, that service or application had to be bundled with the firmware, which meant very long and expensive testing cycles. And that made it really, really challenging. If I want to launch a new service, I'd be looking at 12 to 18 months before I could do it. If you're lucky, maybe 6 to 9. But even then, 6 to 9 is an eternity in today's fast world. If a new TikTok app comes out and you want to be able to capitalize on it, you can't wait 12 to 18 months. You've already missed the ball at that point. And then finally, lifecycle management. Well, we're all familiar with managing the lifecycle of a firmware, but what if you wanted to disaggregate the lifecycle management of these applications from the firmware? Now, this means installing, start, stop, updating, and monitoring, but really performing a similar level of disaggregation that we've seen in other areas of the access network, but directly into the home as well. So those were some of the 4 pillars of challenges, but also 4 areas of opportunities that if we tackle these things, we can really move towards a model where we can quickly monetize all of this bandwidth capacity and things like latency. So what does that mean? Well, we are now in a position where we have service providers in Europe or even all around the world that are doing exactly that. So no longer are you looking at the in-home CPE as a CapEx investment, but you're looking at it as an ARPU enhancement. You are able to significantly improve the business case for an XGS-PON or 25 gig PON rollout by layering some of these value-add applications, things like parental control, home security, service assurance, ultra-low latency for gaming optimizations, and the list goes on and on. So there's a multitude of different areas, and the sky's the limit really in what you can do once you tackle these 4 points. So how do you do that exactly? How do you create a platform in which you can address all of these various opportunities? Well, we're going to talk a little bit about containers. Well, containers have been around forever in the IT world. This is nothing new. In fact, maybe I'll show my age a little bit, but I remember using Solaris zones and containers, 15, 20 years ago. So this has been around for a long time, but it's not something that's made really its way into the embedded device space like a CPE. So in the past, everything was tied to your firmware, your residential gateway functions, your applications, which meant all of the challenges that we talked about, long update cycles, slow time to market, and everything else. But what if we could take advantage of these containers to isolate these applications from the firmware, which really means now that you have a much faster time to market. You can deploy and build these applications independently. You can also secure your platform, your device. So the abstraction layer that we use for containers also provide the security and the resource management. You don't want an application to be able to bring down your CPE. You don't want an application to be able to be used to attack another container or something else in the home. So the container framework is really advantageous because it provides answers to all the points we talked about, but it also provides a security layer, both for the firmware as well as for the other applications. How does this look? Well, really, it's actually quite simple. With this container framework, we are now able to deploy apps very similar to what you would have on your experience on an iPhone or an Android device, where you could go to an app store, select an app, and have that deployed in real time. When I say in real time, it's literally 10-15 seconds. The app gets installed and downloaded and running and everything else. And we've done, many demos, and there are service providers doing this today. Some of the early apps that we see are obviously the ones that are most obvious, like parental control and firewall and security. We're seeing speed test application and things of that nature. But we do have service providers working today on creating a version of Appsource that would be available to them. And really, for this to be successful, it can't be done in a vacuum. So I'm talking maybe from the Nokia's point of view, but we want a very rich and wide ecosystem. So we need all of the vendors and everybody to align themselves to really make this a reality for the fiber providers out there. And when we say make this a reality, is like, for example, a couple of weeks ago, we introduced a variety of devices and ONTs and gateways that offer this kind of capability. And sure, of course, on the first release, it's like anything else. You'll probably see this on your flagship devices or your more advanced ONTs and ONUs, but it won't be long. And when I say long, I'm literally talking a year or two before you're going to start seeing the same functionality available on some of the more cost-sensitive options. So some of the lower end devices, if you will, with limited amounts of memory and RAM and flash and CPU, they are still able to run these containerized application. Maybe not as much, maybe not to the full scale, but the device environment is really ready to be able to do this. As well, once we have the devices ready, it's about creating an ecosystem. So for the last 18 months, we've been talking to dozens and dozens of various application providers in every domain that you can imagine, based on the examples I gave you guys earlier, about what does it take to build and deploy an application on an ONT on a CP that resides in the home. How do you do this? And it's not just about saying you support containers. It's really about providing a rich and simple onboarding experience, training, end-to-end workflow testing, and everything else. So once you create this rich ecosystem, then the service providers don't necessarily only have access to the one app that they want. They have access to dozens and dozens of other applications that have been built and deployed across other operators. This is the same strength that Apple has. When you deploy an app to the Apple App Store, it's pretty much available on all Apple devices. Same thing with Android. We're envisioning something very similar here, that when we work with an app provider, that once they've done this integration, they can easily deploy this across a variety of ONTs, regardless of what the SARC architecture is, regardless of what the operating system. We try to mitigate a lot of the idiosyncrasies that come from that. If you remember those 4 pillars, SOC and operating system was one of the main things. So providing an abstraction layer that makes it really easy to port, to cross-compile those applications is really key to creating a very rich developer ecosystem here. Now, once we have that, you get to the point that I'm really excited about, is really the service creation opportunities. Today, we have real-world examples of containerized applications for everything from managed Wi-Fi, from security and parental control, ultra-low latency gaming packages. We're actually doing a project with an operator, a fiber-to-home operator in Canada, where we're testing how can you monetize that. And the reality is that the consumer base is a lot wiser than it was 15 years ago. If, for example, you take a gamer, if a gamer has a 200 megabit connection, fiber to home connection today, and he's having issues playing in the home, going to a 500 megabit is not going to make it better. Being able to manage latency is. So there are services like ultra low latency gaming packages that provide the link between the fiber and the Wi-Fi, such as Vincent mentioned earlier. How do we make sure that the two, get married together? We also have remote worker SD-WAN services. Working from home is not going to go away now for a very long time. And even when things settle down, hopefully after this whole COVID crisis, we're still going to see 25 to 30% of the enterprise population still working from home. So it's really important to be able to enable enterprise services in a residential context to be able to monetize that access. And obviously you have your VPN services, service assurance, telehealth, remote security, and speed test applications, and the list goes on and on. And today, there are service providers deploying containerized applications, several containerized applications commercially. It's been around for about 2 to 3 years now in the space, even though it was in its infancy. And I absolutely expect that within the next 2 years, we're going to start seeing the first real Appsource. So you're going to start seeing service providers enabling their consumer base to pick. Today, service provider offers a single security application. Now you can purchase it for €5 a month. And you can get this security barrel control. Well, in a year from now, maybe they'll allow the end user to pick. Maybe I want Bitdefender. Maybe I want SAM Security. Maybe I want F-Secure. Maybe I want a lot or somebody else. The reality is that you give choices, you increase your revenue potential, increase your ARPU. And when you tie revenue opportunities like this to a deployment like an XGS-PON deployment, which can be quite expensive, you can dramatically improve your business case and make this a lot easier to go about. So with this, Vincent, I think I'm just about at the time end. So if we're going to keep some questions, I'm going to pass control back over to the presenter role, and we can go ahead.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. I think that was, first of all, perfectly on time to give us a few minutes to address some of the questions I've seen in the question box. So thanks very much for those who took the time to ask this question. I will start maybe with the first one, which is about the role of the ITU as the only relevant standard body. I'm reading, and when will the ITU accept 25G PON?
Okay, so that would be the question for me. Thank you, Vincent. First of all, that's not entirely correct, because there is also IEEE PON. So ITUT is not the only one that is standardizing. And now there is also an MSA. Now, I understand a bit of confusion because MSAs are not so frequent in the telecom industry until now, at least. But they are very frequent in the industries that are moving faster than the standards. Like with web scales, they're much more frequent. Now, what is important to know is a couple of things. The MSA and the 25 gigabit PON is something that was initiated by the operators. So they saw the need, and then the vendors are following, of course, to help operators achieve their business goals with the technology that is best fit for that. And due to different geopolitical reasons, the ITUT didn't pass the standard, which is very unfortunate, and something I don't like to talk about a lot. What is important is to find a way to go forward, and the industry has found its way through the MSA. So, and maybe as a last comment, the MSA is not redefining the 25 gigabit PON from the scratch. This is not the case. The big part of the 25 gigabit PON is exactly the same as it was standardized in the ITUT, because a lot has been reused. There are only very small differences in the physical layer, in the wavelength plan, and so on, that the MSA is fine-tuning. And we have heard from the operators they are not really concerned about ITUT, so I don't think that's a big problem.
Thank you, Anna. Maybe a question to Gino. Gino, what kind of resources are required on the the CPU for containerization? I mean, CPU, RAM, flash, etc.
Yeah, that's a very good question, and the answer is it depends, obviously. But the good news is you can deploy containerization technology on CPUs that are very limited in resources. When I say that, I mean maybe there's only about 200 to 300 MIPS CPU cycle available. Maybe you only have about 30 megs of RAM and maybe 30 megs of flash available. Those environments are still suitable to be able to deploy a couple of applications. That being said, some service providers are really betting a lot on this technology, and it's not uncommon now to see RFPs or requests for WinTs and ONUs that have as much as 30 gigs of flash available for containers, or 8 gigs of RAM available, and so forth. So it does very much scale from the very low end to the very high end. And although you don't need a lot of resources, there's a significant investment being made on higher end capabilities for the years to come. They're not just thinking about what I can do on 1 gig or 10 gig. They're really thinking what I can do in 5 to 10 years from now on 25 gig as well.
Okay, thanks. I just want to acknowledge one of our participants with the surname of Rodolphe, who bombarded us with many questions, mostly related to 5G. So Rodolphe, I think I will apply this question, pass them to our speakers, and they will address it directly to you because they are not directly related to the subject of today. But I just don't want you to feel that we are ignoring this question. They will be forwarded to Nokia to be addressed separately. Maybe, what about, Gino, again, I'm reading, could you please put a few words on the future roadmap for P2P active equipment? Christian is asking us.
Yeah,
maybe
go ahead, Anna. Yeah, I was going to say, go ahead, Anna.
Yeah, that's a point-to-point active equipment. So, well, if we look at the, how much is point-to-point deployed versus PON, it is really a huge difference. That most of the fiber deployments today are done on PON, but nevertheless, point-to-point continues to have its importance, continues to, have the segments and it targets services. So yes, there will be, I think the next step would be 25 gigabit as well.
Okay, and maybe I think you have addressed somehow, but the question is still for you, Anna. I'm reading that the key drivers for 25 PON versus XGS, we expect that 25 gig will not be widely rolled out to normal end user, I guess, a private end user, but rather to satisfy the need of businesses, 5G and backhaul. Maybe could you just maybe re-explain what you say around the segmented usage of higher speed for the PON?
Yeah, yeah, and maybe just let me quote the president of Bell Labs, the previous one, Marcus Weldon, who have said once that in our industry the first things come to satisfy the needs of enterprises and businesses, and then the consumers are kind of a side effect, benefit from these innovations. So maybe this is applicable here. And you are absolutely right to make that observations. I mean, GPON is already a lot of bandwidth, although, as I said, it's coming, it's running out of fuel. But XGS will definitely be good technology for consumer services for at least end of the decade. But occasionally you need to boost that speed, to boost XGS-PON to be able to get business services, the true 10 gigabit, which is now the marketplace for businesses. Because don't forget, XGS-PON is a 10 gigabit technology, but in reality, it can deliver something between 8.5, 9 gigabit per second because of the all overhead that comes. And that's absolutely normal because in GPON, it's not 2.5 gigabit, it's a little bit lower because of that overhead. So the enterprises are moving towards 10 gigabit connectivity. XGS cannot do that. You need to go with 25 gigabit PON. Also the 5G anyhow, you need a higher capacity. And these would be the first use cases. It doesn't mean that, one day I'm sure we will need 25 also for consumer services, but that's not going to happen in the next few years for sure, unless somebody comes with a killing application and something we all like to have at home. But history tells us it's not likely. It's unlikely to happen.
Okay, so maybe phased approach. And if I bring back the conversation to CPE and the presentation of Gino, I was struck by everything you said around, service provider considering the use of Appsource for their broadband solution. I mean, that's a dramatic shift compared to the strategy they've had so far. How do you manage to convince them to move to this type of ecosystem?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the reality is, at least on a personal level, I don't expect that we'll ever reach a point where we'll have a wide walled gardening experience like an Apple App Store or a Google Android store. That's not really the environment that we work in. That being said, I do fully expect that service providers will embrace the concept of app stores and this wide ecosystem for their own purposes. So they'll be able to take advantage of the open source community, of the vendor community, to be able to quickly and easily port their apps using IT technology they've been familiar with, like containers and containerization and operating systems like OpenWRT and things like that. So yeah, do I expect that it'll be as simple as going to the Apple App Store? No. But there are service providers today investing a lot of effort, time, and money in creating an App Store experience that they can monetize. At the end of the day, it's really about being able to generate more revenue. You have all of this bandwidth, you have all of these capabilities like latency. How do you make use of it? Now, and the reason I say that, Vincent, is if you have a fiber to home connection, I have a 1 gig fiber to home at home. That's what I have. I have it for the last 10 years. And what is my motivation to go to 2 gigs? My video conferencing is not necessarily going to be better. My gaming is not going to be better, but there are things that this technology and this bandwidth and this latency offers that can be utilized and monetized. And taking advantage of, tying in the latency from the fiber world to the Wi-Fi world, extending a network slice into a residential context, extending enterprise services. Maybe you want to create a slice in the home network for telemetry offload for autonomous vehicles. Maybe you want to do it for IoT appliances. So there's a lot of different ways. And I think the service providers are keen or wise to it. They see what the web scale and the OTT players have done, and they want a piece of the action as well. I think you're on mute, Vincent. Sorry.
Well, thank you. Thanks for this last comment. We're reaching the end of the time for this webinar. I think it was great to see that, rolling out fiber is not the end of the game. It's also about increasing the benefit you get from fiber via developing new technology on fiber, and also looking at what's happening at the edge or the ultra edge, as you mentioned, because that is key to maximize the experience from a user standpoint. I'm sure we will have more information to share with you. I would like to thank the audience for attending. Repeat that we will forward all questions to our guests today so they can address those who have not been taken today. The replay is available. Communication will be sent to each of you with link to that replay. We will also send you a link to get the PDF of the slide deck which was used today. So thank you very much for your attention. Watch out for further communication. There are more webinars coming your way, and we hope to see you very soon on our webinar series. Thank you very much, and thank you to Anna and Gino for having such an insightful presentation today.
Thank you, Vincent, for the opportunity. And thanks everybody listening.
Thank you and goodbye. Have a good rest of your day.
Bye.